The morning mist hung low over the grounds of Balmoral Castle as James Morrison adjusted his uniform collar for what would be his final patrol as a royal guard. After 32 years of devoted service to the crown, he had witnessed countless moments of history, but nothing had prepared him for the events that would unfold in the weeks following Queen Elizabeth's peaceful passing. James had always been more than just a guard to the royal household. His gentle nature and genuine love for animals had made him the unofficial caretaker of the Queen's beloved Corgis. Every morning he would arrive early to help with their feeding, and every evening he would ensure they were settled comfortably in their quarters. The Queen had noticed his dedication and often stopped to chat with him about the dog's well-being during her daily walks. "They're not just pets, James," she had told him one autumn afternoon, her weathered hands stroking Muck's golden coat. "They're family. They've been my constant companions through everything." Her voice carried a weight that spoke of decades of service, loss, and unwavering duty. The Queen's Corgis were legendary. For over 70 years, these small, spirited dogs had been her faithful companions, appearing in official portraits, accompanying her on travels, and providing comfort during the most challenging periods of her reign. Muck and Sandy, the last two remaining Corgis, had been gifts from her family, and their presence brought her immense joy during her final years. When the inevitable day came and the nation mourned the loss of their longest reigning monarch, James found himself thinking not just about the Queen, but about her two remaining companions. He had been present during many of her private conversations with the senior household staff about the future care of her pets. The Queen had been very specific about her wishes. "Promise me," she had said to him during one of their last conversations, her eyes still sharp despite her frailty, "that Muck and Sandy will be treated with the same love and respect they've always known. They're old now, like I am, and they need stability. They need to stay together." James had given his word, never imagining that keeping that promise would put him in direct conflict with the new Queen consort. The transition period following the Queen's death was chaotic. The entire royal household was adjusting to new protocols, new schedules, and new leadership. King Charles had his own way of doing things, and naturally, Queen Consort Camilla was establishing her preferences for how the household should be run. Among these changes was her decision about the fate of the late Queen's Corgis. James first learned about Camilla's plans through the household grapevine. Sarah, one of the senior housekeepers who had worked alongside him for over a decade, approached him with tears in her eyes. "James, I don't know how to tell you this," she whispered, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Her Majesty the Queen Consort has decided that Muck and Sandy need to be rehomed. She says they're too disruptive for the new household arrangements." The words hit James like a physical blow. He had expected many changes, but this felt like a betrayal of everything the late Queen had stood for. These weren't just any dogs. They were the last living connection to a woman who had devoted her entire life to serving others. "Rehomed where?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I heard she's already been in contact with some distant relatives of the royal family. People who live in the countryside, away from the palaces. She wants them gone before the coronation preparations begin in earnest." That evening, James sat in his modest apartment on the castle grounds, staring at a photograph he had taken of the Queen with Muck and Sandy just months before her death. Her smile in that picture was genuine, the kind of joy that came from being surrounded by unconditional love. The Corgis were pressed close to her, their eyes bright and alert, completely at ease in her presence. He thought about his own journey to this position. Growing up in a working-class family in Wales, James had never imagined he would spend his career protecting royalty. But his military background and genuine character had opened doors, and over the decades, he had earned the trust and respect of the royal family. He wasn't just staff to them. He was part of the extended royal household family. The Queen had always treated him with kindness and respect. She remembered his birthday, asked about his aging mother, and genuinely cared about his well-being. When his mother had been diagnosed with cancer 5 years earlier, the Queen had personally ensured he received the time off he needed to care for her, and had even arranged for flowers to be sent to the funeral. Now, as he prepared for retirement, James felt a moral obligation that went beyond his professional duties. He had made a promise to a dying woman, and that promise meant something to him. The Queen's final wish regarding her beloved companions wasn't just a casual request. It was entrusted to him because she believed he would honor it. The next morning, James made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply accepting the rehoming plan, he requested a private audience with Queen Consort Camilla. It was an unprecedented move for someone in his position, but he felt he had no choice. The late Queen's trust in him demanded that he speak up, regardless of the consequences. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in one of the smaller sitting rooms at Clarence's house. James had never been so nervous in his entire career. He had stood guard during state visits, protected the royal family during public events, and maintained his composure in countless high-pressure situations. But this felt different. This was personal. As he waited outside the sitting room, adjusting his uniform one final time, James reflected on what he was about to do. He was essentially challenging the authority of the new Queen Consort, something that could easily result in his immediate dismissal and the loss of his pension. But every time he wavered, he thought about the Queen's words. "Promise me, James." When the door opened and he was invited inside, James steeled himself for what would be the most important conversation of his career. Queen Consort. Camilla sat behind an ornate mahogany desk, her posture straight and formal. She wore a navy blue dress with pearls, her silver hair perfectly styled. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast elegant shadows across the room. But James barely noticed the grandeur around him. His focus was entirely on the woman who now held the power to honor or dismiss the late Queen's final wishes. "James, please sit down," Camilla said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her voice was measured and controlled, giving nothing away about her feelings regarding this unusual meeting. "I understand you wish to speak with me about something important." James remained standing for a moment, gathering his courage. This was his moment of truth. "Your Majesty, thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this is highly irregular, but I felt I had no choice but to speak with you directly." "Very well. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, James launched into what he had practiced saying the night before. "Your Majesty, I've served the royal household faithfully for 32 years. In that time, I've had the privilege of caring for Her late Majesty's Corgis. They weren't just pets to her. They were her family, her constant companions through decades of service to the nation." Camilla's expression remained neutral, but James noticed a slight stiffening in her posture. She knew where this conversation was heading. "I'm aware of your attachment to the animals, James, but I'm afraid I don't see how this concerns you. The decision about their future care has already been made." "With respect, Your Majesty, I believe it concerns me because Her late Majesty specifically asked me to ensure that Muck and Sandy would be treated with love and respect. She wanted them to stay together, to have stability in their remaining years. She trusted me with this responsibility." The room fell silent. Camilla studied James's face, perhaps surprised by his directness. In her years of being part of the royal family, she had grown accustomed to staff members who followed orders without question. This level of challenge to her authority was something she hadn't expected. "James, I appreciate your loyalty to the late Queen, but you must understand that circumstances have changed. King Charles and I have our own way of managing the household. The dogs are disruptive to our daily routines. They bark during meetings, they leave hair on furniture, and frankly, they require more attention than we can provide. The arrangement I've made is in their best interest. Your Majesty, may I ask about this arrangement? Who are these relatives and have they ever cared for corgis before? These dogs are elderly. Muick is 11 years old and Sandy is 13. They've lived their entire lives in royal residences. They know these halls, these people, these routines. Sudden changes at their age could be traumatic. Camilla's patience was clearly wearing thin. Her voice took on a sharper edge. I don't believe I need to justify my decisions to you, James. The arrangements have been made with people who are perfectly capable of caring for them. This discussion is over. But James didn't move to leave. This was his last chance, and he had come too far to back down now. Your Majesty, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I made a promise to a dying woman. The late Queen specifically told me that these dogs should stay together and continue to receive the same level of care they've always known. She was very clear about this. The late Queen made many requests in her final months, James. Not all of them can be honored in the current circumstances. The callousness of that statement hit James like a slap. The woman he had served and loved for decades was being dismissed as if her final wishes were mere inconveniences. His professional composure finally cracked. Your Majesty, with all due respect, these weren't just requests. The late Queen devoted 70 years of her life to serving this nation and this monarchy. She sacrificed her privacy, her personal desires, and her freedom for duty. Surely her final wish regarding her beloved companions deserves more consideration than this. Camilla stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. How dare you lecture me about duty and sacrifice? Do you think you're the only one who cared about the late Queen? Do you think you understand her better than her own family? I'm not claiming to understand her better than anyone, Your Majesty. I'm simply trying to honor a promise I made to her. These dogs brought her joy during some of the most difficult periods of her life. They comforted her when Prince Philip died. They were with her during her final illness. Doesn't that mean something? Of course it means something, but sentiment cannot override practical considerations. I have a household to run, James. I have duties and responsibilities that you clearly don't understand. James felt his control slipping away completely. What I understand, Your Majesty, is that the late Queen trusted me with something precious to her. She believed that I would ensure her wishes were respected. She had faith in me because she knew I would put her memory above my own convenience. The implication was clear, and Camilla's face flushed with anger. Are you suggesting that I don't respect her memory? Are you questioning my commitment to the monarchy she served? I'm not questioning your commitment to the monarchy, Your Majesty. I'm questioning whether this particular decision honors her memory. She loved those dogs more than anything else in her personal life. They were her one indulgence, her one source of pure, uncomplicated joy. And now they're my responsibility, and I've made a decision about their care. This conversation is over, James. You've overstepped your bounds considerably. But James pressed on, knowing this might be his only opportunity. Your Majesty, I've seen how these dogs react to change. When the late Queen was ill and couldn't maintain her usual routines with them, they became anxious and withdrawn. They're not just pets who can adapt to any environment. They're elderly animals with deep emotional attachments to this place and these people. They're dogs, James. Dogs adapt. The family I've chosen for them has experience with animals and a large country estate where they'll have plenty of space to run. Have you met these people yourself, Your Majesty? Have you seen how they interact with animals? The late Queen was very specific about the kind of care she wanted for Muick and Sandy. Camilla's composure finally broke completely. I don't need to justify every decision I make to you or anyone else. These arrangements have been made, and they will proceed as planned. Your emotional attachment to these animals is clouding your judgment. My emotional attachment, Your Majesty. These dogs have been part of the royal household for their entire lives. They've appeared in official photographs, accompanied the late Queen to public events, and been part of the fabric of this institution. They're not just animals to be disposed of when they become inconvenient. Disposed of? How dare you suggest that I'm disposing of them? I'm arranging for their care with a loving family. A family that's never met them, Your Majesty. A family that doesn't understand their specific needs, their routines, their personalities. The late Queen knew every one of their quirks, their preferences, their fears. She wanted them to continue receiving that level of individual attention. The argument was escalating beyond what either of them had anticipated. What had started as a respectful disagreement was becoming a heated confrontation that challenged the very foundation of royal hierarchy and protocol. Camilla walked to the window, her back to James, clearly trying to regain her composure. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled but cold. James, your years of service to this household are appreciated, but this conversation has gone far beyond what's appropriate. You've questioned my judgment, my commitment to the late Queen's memory, and my authority as Queen Consort. This is unacceptable. James knew he had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, but he also knew that walking away now would mean abandoning the promise he had made. The late Queen's trust in him demanded that he exhaust every possibility, regardless of the personal cost. James stood his ground in the elegant sitting room, knowing that his next words would determine not just his own fate, but the future of the two dogs that had meant everything to the late Queen. The silence stretched between him and Camilla, heavy with tension and unspoken consequences. Your Majesty, James said quietly, I understand that I've overstepped traditional boundaries. I know that questioning your decisions could cost me everything I've worked for over 3 decades. But I also know that when I gave my word to the late Queen, I made a sacred promise. If I walk away from this room without having done everything in my power to honor that promise, I'll never be able to live with myself. Camilla turned back from the window, her expression unreadable. For a moment, James wondered if she was about to summon security to have him removed from the premises. Instead, she returned to her desk and sat down, studying him with renewed interest. You're willing to sacrifice your career, your pension, your reputation for 2 dogs? I'm willing to sacrifice those things to keep a promise to a woman who gave everything to serve this nation, Your Majesty. The late Queen never asked for much in return for her decades of sacrifice, but she did ask me to ensure that her beloved companions would be cared for properly. That wasn't too much to ask from someone who gave up so much of her personal happiness for duty. Something in James's tone seemed to reach Camilla in a way that his earlier arguments hadn't. She leaned back in her chair, her anger replaced by something that looked almost like curiosity. Tell me exactly what she said to you, James. Her exact words. James closed his eyes, recalling that final conversation with perfect clarity. She was sitting in her private study, Your Majesty, with both dogs at her feet. She looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen her, but her voice was still strong. She said, James, I know I can trust you with this. Promise me that Muick and Sandy will be treated with the same love and respect they've always known. They're old now, like I am, and they need stability. They need to stay together. Promise me they won't become a burden to anyone, but that they'll still know they're loved. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Camilla's expression had softened, and James could see that his words had affected her more than she wanted to admit. She really said that? About them not becoming a burden? Yes, Your Majesty. I think she was worried about exactly what's happening now. She knew that her dogs might be seen as an inconvenience by the new household. She was trying to protect them even after she was gone. Camilla stood up again, but this time her movement seemed less agitated, more thoughtful. She walked to a side table where several framed photographs were displayed. James recognized one of them. It showed the late Queen at a garden party, with several corgis gathered around her feet, their tails wagging as they looked up at her with obvious adoration. "I never really understood her attachment to them," Camilla said quietly. "I found them overwhelming. They were always underfoot, always demanding attention. When Charles and I were courting all those years ago, I found them rather intimidating, to be honest. They were so protective of her. They loved her completely, Your Majesty, and she loved them the same way. For someone who had to be so careful about every relationship, so guarded about showing emotion in public, the corgis were her one source of uncomplicated affection." Camilla picked up the photograph, studying the Queen's face. "She does look genuinely happy in this picture, doesn't she? Not her public smile, but really happy. That's how she always looked when she was with them, Your Majesty. They brought out a side of her that the public rarely saw, the side that was just a woman who loved her dogs." "James," Camilla said, still looking at the photograph, "tell me honestly, if I allow the dogs to remain here, can you guarantee they won't disrupt important meetings or state functions? Can you personally ensure they're properly cared for without becoming a burden on the household staff?" James felt his heart skip a beat. Was she actually reconsidering? "Your Majesty, I would personally take full responsibility for their care. I know their routines, their dietary needs, their health requirements. They're actually very well behaved when they feel secure in their environment. The disruptions you've experienced might be because they're anxious about all the changes happening around them. And you're retiring soon. What happens to them then? Your Majesty, I would be willing to delay my retirement to continue caring for them. They're both quite elderly. Muick has some arthritis, and Sandy has early signs of heart problems. With proper care, they probably have 2 or 3 good years left. I would stay until they no longer need care." Camilla set down the photograph and looked directly at James. "You would delay your retirement, give up your plans to care for 2 elderly dogs?" "Your Majesty, the late Queen gave up her entire life for duty. Delaying my retirement for a few years to honor her final wish seems like a small sacrifice in comparison." For several long minutes, Camilla said nothing. James could see her wrestling with the decision, weighing practical considerations against emotional ones. Finally, she spoke. "There would have to be conditions, James. Strict conditions. The dogs would be your complete responsibility. Any disruptions, any problems, any health issues that affect the household routine, and the original arrangements would proceed immediately." James felt a surge of hope. "I understand completely, Your Majesty. I would accept full responsibility. They would need to be kept away from formal areas during official functions. They would need proper health monitoring, and any significant medical expenses would need to be approved in advance." "Yes, Your Majesty. All of that is completely reasonable." Camilla walked back to her desk and sat down, her decision clearly made. "Very well, James. Against my better judgment, I'm going to honor the late Queen's request. But I want to be absolutely clear. This arrangement exists entirely because of your personal commitment to their care. If that commitment falters for any reason, the alternative arrangements will proceed immediately." Relief flooded through James so powerfully that he felt weak in the knees. "Your Majesty, I cannot thank you enough. This means everything to me, and I know it would mean everything to the late Queen." "I hope you're right about that, James. I hope this decision honors her memory in the way you believe it does." "Your Majesty, if I may say so, I think this decision shows exactly the kind of compassion and understanding that the monarchy needs. The late Queen chose her staff carefully, and she trusted me with this responsibility because she knew I would fight for what was important to her. Your willingness to listen to that fight, to reconsider your position based on new information, shows real wisdom. Camilla studied him for a moment. "James, I want you to know that I didn't make this decision lightly. I still believe the practical concerns I raised are valid, but I also recognize that the late Queen's final wishes deserve more consideration than I initially gave them. Perhaps there's room in this household for both practical efficiency and emotional legacy." As James prepared to leave, Camilla had one final request. "James, I want you to bring Mook and Sandy to see me next week. If they're going to remain part of this household, I should probably get to know them properly. The late Queen obviously saw something special in them, and maybe it's time I tried to see it too. They'll be honored to meet with you properly, Your Majesty, and I think you'll find that once they feel secure again, they're wonderful companions." Walking back through the palace corridors, James felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had kept his promise to the late Queen, but more than that, he had witnessed something remarkable. A powerful person choosing compassion over convenience, legacy over efficiency. That evening, as he sat with Mook and Sandy in their familiar quarters, James reflected on the day's events. The dogs seemed to sense that something important had shifted. They were more relaxed than they had been in weeks, as if they somehow understood that their future was secure. "You're staying home," James told them quietly, scratching behind Muick's ears. "Just like she wanted. You get to stay together in the place where you've always belonged." As the weeks passed, the arrangement worked better than anyone had expected. Camilla's weekly visits with the dogs gradually became something she looked forward to, and she began to understand what the late Queen had seen in these devoted, spirited companions. The Corgis, sensing that they were once again welcome and loved, returned to their former selves, playful, affectionate, and utterly devoted to their human family. James's courage in challenging authority had preserved not just two elderly dogs, but a piece of the late Queen's legacy that might otherwise have been lost. In standing up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost, he had embodied the very values that the monarchy claimed to represent. And in listening to his challenge with an open mind, Camilla had shown that true leadership sometimes means having the wisdom to change course when presented with a different perspective. The late Queen's beloved Corgis lived out their remaining years exactly as she had wished, surrounded by love, respect, and the familiar comfort of the only home they had ever known.